What if everything you thought you knew about the Catfish scandal was only half the story? Because there's one name that keeps quietly showing up in every corner of this mess, and almost no one talks about it. Robyns' friend Kendra, the woman who claimed she was scared enough to change phone numbers, but still called the Catfish like an old friend. The interviews, the contradictions, and the silence that followed are more telling than any confession, and by the end of this video, you might see the entire situation very differently. So if you love deep dives that expose what was hidden in plain sight, hit subscribe now, because we break down the stories reality TV never fully explains, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Robyn Brown's friend Kendra has always been a background presence that never quite made sense to viewers. Someone who appeared suddenly, spoke loudly, and then slowly became part of one of the most confusing chapters in the family story. And the more people revisit her interviews, the clearer it becomes that her role was never small or accidental, because from the very beginning, she positioned herself as someone with inside knowledge, someone close to the family, and someone who claimed to be acting out of concern. Yet her own words repeatedly contradicted each other in ways that cannot be ignored. And it all starts with her admission that she was not only aware of the Catfish situation early on, but was actively in contact with the same individual involved. And that detail alone changes everything, because it places her inside the story rather than reacting from the outside. And when she describes being afraid of hacking to the point of changing phone providers multiple times, it painted a picture of danger, fear, and vulnerability. But that image collapsed the moment she casually admitted to calling the same person later, speaking comfortably as if none of that fear ever existed. And viewers immediately noticed that shift, because fear does not simply vanish without explanation, and comfort does not come naturally with someone you claim to be avoiding. And that contradiction became the first crack in the narrative. And from there, the story only grew more tangled as Kendra went on to share her opinions about Mary's situation, framing it not as manipulation or deception by another party, but as a deliberate choice on Mary's part. And while she framed it as analysis, she spoke with a certainty that suggested personal investment rather than distant observation, describing emotional exchanges, private messages, and intimate details as proof, and insisting that no one would go that far unless it was real. And again, this was her interpretation, but it carried weight because she presented herself as someone who had seen evidence firsthand. And then she spoke about her loyalty to Robyn, describing years of public defense criticism endured and emotional energy spent standing up for someone she believed in, only to admit that she was never publicly defended in return. And that admission changed the tone of the conversation, because it revealed imbalance and unreciprocated loyalty. And when loyalty goes unanswered, resentment often follows, even if unintentionally. And that emotional undercurrent can influence perception, memory, and narrative. And then came the moment that many viewers found impossible to overlook, when Kendra described conversations with Robyn and Cody using language nearly identical to what Robyn herself later said on the show, particularly the claim that Robyn told Cody to go help Mary. And the similarity was striking, not just in meaning, but in phrasing, cadence, and sequence. And to many, it felt rehearsed, or at least coordinated. And whether intentional or not, it raised questions about how much of the story was shared and shaped behind the scenes before it ever reached the audience. And as Kendra continued, she positioned herself as the first to notice Mary's withdrawal, claiming she saw it before anyone else and took it upon herself to address it directly, portraying herself as the moral compass in the situation, someone who noticed the signs and acted. And that framing placed her at the center of events again, reinforcing her proximity and influence. And then she described receiving materials from the other party involved, including pictures and recordings, and admitted to forwarding them to Robyn, which directly ties Robyn into the information loop, regardless of intent. And that detail matters because it shows that Robyn was not merely reacting to what she was told, but was receiving curated information through a trusted intermediary. And Kendra denied creating or steering the narrative, yet her own account shows she played a role in how information moved, who saw what and when. and that influence cannot be dismissed as passive. And as the interview continued, she expressed frustration not at the accusations themselves, but at the silence from the family, saying no one stepped forward to deny claims or defend her publicly. And that silence became a recurring theme, because when someone speaks this openly and is wrong, correction usually follows. And when someone speaks openly and is right, acknowledgement usually follows. But here, there was neither, and that absence became its own statement. And then, after years of commentary, interviews, and public presence, Kendra disappeared entirely from the conversation. No follow-ups, no clarifications, no denials, no explanations, just silence. And in a story this complex, silence is never neutral. It invites speculation and leaves viewers to connect dots on their own. And that unresolved ending is what keeps people watching, revisiting, and questioning, because every time the story feels settled, another inconsistency resurfaces, pulling the audience back in. And as long as those contradictions remain unanswered, the story cannot truly end.
As the story continues to unfold, what makes this situation so gripping is not any single statement, but the pattern that forms when everything is placed together. Because Kendra did not simply comment once and disappear, she spoke repeatedly across time, adding layers that only complicate the picture further. And with each retelling, the certainty in her voice remained, even as the details shifted. And that is where viewers begin to lean in, because consistency matters when credibility is involved. And yet, here we see moments where fear becomes confidence, distance becomes closeness, and concern becomes control. And those shifts are subtle but powerful, because they reveal how narratives evolve depending on audience, timing, and personal position. And when Kendra spoke about finances, emotional support, and influence, she hinted at dynamics that were never meant for public consumption, suggesting that money, security, and stability were quietly shaping decisions. And while she framed these comments as observation, they carried the weight of implication. And implication is often where the most damage is done, because it leaves interpretation open while steering perception. And throughout her commentary, Robyns remained a constant presence, not always directly accused, not openly blamed, but consistently positioned as the person who knew first, the person who was informed, the person who was trusted. And that repeated association matters, because repetition builds narrative gravity, and the more times a name appears at the center of a story, the harder it becomes to dismiss coincidence. And then there is the way Kendra spoke about the family as a whole, oscillating between loyalty and disappointment, admiration and frustration. And that emotional back and forth creates tension, because it suggests unresolved conflict and unmet expectations. And when someone feels ignored after giving so much, they often seek validation elsewhere, sometimes through interviews, sometimes through exposure, sometimes through silence. And silence can be just as loud as speech, because after all the interviews, all the explanations, all the confident claims, the abrupt disappearance leaves a vacuum, and vacuums invite speculation, and speculation keeps stories alive. And what keeps viewers watching is not outrage, but curiosity, because curiosity asks, what happened next? Why did it stop? Who decided it was over? And those questions linger long after the video ends. And the structure of this story feeds that curiosity perfectly, because just when viewers think they understand Kendra's role, another detail surfaces, reframing everything again. And that is the loop that keeps attention locked in, the sense that resolution is always just one revelation away, and yet never arrives. And even when accusations surfaced that she helped shape or create the narrative, she denied them strongly. Yet denial alone does not erase proximity, and proximity is the thread that ties this entire story together. Proximity to information, proximity to people, proximity to influence. And when someone has that much access, their role can never be neutral, even if their intentions were. And that is what makes this story so compelling, because it lives in the gray space between intention and impact. And as time passes, memories fade, interviews resurface, and audiences grow more critical, revisiting old footage with new context and seeing things they missed the first time. And that rewatch value is what gives this story its staying power, because it rewards attention and patience. And every time someone revisits it, they notice another contradiction, another alignment, another silence that feels too intentional to ignore. And that is why the question of where Kendra is now matters, not because of who she is, but because of what her absence represents: an unresolved chapter, a missing voice, a story that stopped mid-sentence. And until that silence is explained or broken, the narrative remains open, looping viewers back to the beginning again and again, searching for clarity and a story built on fragments. And as long as those fragments exist, the conversation continues, pulling audiences deeper and ensuring they stay watching until the very last moment, hoping that this time the final piece will finally fall into place. And when you step back and look at everything side by side, the interviews, the contradictions, and the sudden silence, one thing becomes clear. This story was never as simple as it was presented, and the unanswered questions are exactly why it still matters today. So if you want real breakdowns, honest analysis, and deep dives into reality TV stories that never truly end, make sure you hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us, because this conversation is far from over, and the next reveal is always closer than you think.